Humans underestimate, I think, how much of our communication structure is actually emotional.
Mm.
We use words to put thoughts into a understandable order, but feelings, the expressions, and the energy of emotion is really the foundation and the bedrock of how we communicate in physical reality.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality in order to demystify spirituality. I'm truly excited about this conversation today, and I truly say conversation because this is going to be a good one. I feel like. How you doing today, Kat?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's gonna be so much fun. So first, tell us a little bit about who you are.
I usually the labels that I attach to it are just for conversation purposes. I usually introduce myself as a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant because I don't have a better label to put on it at this time. And I was about 12 years old when I started leaving my body and having experiences with non corporeal personalities that I found in other astral states. And so I spent 30 years in my own head about it and trying to understand the things that I was experiencing, coming out of a more agnostic or scientifically minded family structure. I didn't really have any spiritual words or spiritual ways of understanding what I was going through. And so for a long time I was in the closet about it. I didn't tell anybody about the visions I was seeing, the voices that I would hear, the different astral experiences that I would have and the personalities that I met there. I spent a long time worried that I was a crazy person and that I shouldn't be broadcasting that. And so I made the New Year's resolutions to myself this year that I was going to come out in the open and start talking about it in the terms that I made up on my own, because I think the more different ways we have of describing the things that we're experiencing, the more the message can reach different people.
Mhm. I love that, and what I love most about that is one thing I really like to do on the show, and really just in my life in general, is talk to people who have various spiritual experiences. We all have them, but because in our society it's become this whole, like, taboo thing to even discuss or bring up, we don't talk about it, and we instantly throw labels on other people, and then as thus, we throw labels onto ourselves. So, growing up with a scientific family, what aspects of hearing the voices and things like that, what aspects of that was really conflicting with you scientifically?
For me, the entire experience, I always termed it for myself in an exploration or collecting experience data as part of almost a science experiment myself. I was One day when I was a child, I was just guided to the metaphysical section of the public library and ended up checking out a book that was called Soul Travel,
Mm,
which laid out a meditation practice. And I suppose that for a 12-year-old kid, taking up meditation as a hobby is a kind of an odd hobby to have. But I thought that the results that I was getting, being able to feel energy, to move energy within my body, to call it forward from other sources, like all of the things I was experiencing through this practice was an interesting enough result, an interesting enough data in order to continue the practice of it. And it wasn't long into doing this practice and collecting my results that I got my first knowing. And I've always just called it getting the knowing, but I know nowadays a lot of people call it getting a download. But a little ashamed to confess we weren't downloading anything in those days. That's before the internet was really a big thing.
or it
So
was more.
yeah, it's a little old school. I always just called it getting the knowing, but the first knowing that I ever really remember receiving a big chunk of concept, a big information block, was that you're not really in to begin with. Like, your body's not a jam jar, you're not stuck inside of it. And the whole knowing was more like consciousness is more a radio station. You're tuned to physical reality here when you're awake and operating in it. But as you start to move back into different layers of consciousness, if you know where the dial is, you can tune your consciousness to experiencing different stations, basically. And so once that really integrated, that knowing was when I started like leaving my body almost accidentally at first. I wasn't doing it on purpose and it would happen sporadically, but it was, like, an exciting enough result for me. Again, I was treating the whole thing like an experiment, so it was an exciting enough result for me that in adolescent brain, I was like, "I wonder what else is real. If this is real, I wonder what else is real." So I went it was right back to the library for me, and I checked out a book on, ancient Gaelic rites because I was like, "Maybe magic is real." I don't know at this point, I'm just conducting experiments, and I chose for my first experiment into rituals summoning fairies because I was really thinking Tinkerbell, but it turns out Disney lied to me about fairies because after following the instructions and performing the ritual, and I knew about gathering up my energy and everything from the meditation practices. I knew how to control my energy, so I put a lot of energy into what I was doing. I And it felt really powerful, but at the time, nothing had happened. I was still just sitting in my room and there were no fairies collecting their offerings or anything, so I was pretty disappointed with the result, I remember, until that night when I ended up flung out of my body all the way across my room when I was doing my meditation practice. And when I turned around and looked, my body was still there on the bed, but there was this big hovering dark figure like looming over me. And so I ended up with what people usually call a sleep paralysis demon, but I was never paralyzed because I could astral project, so I was out of my body and running around the room with this personality construct was there, and it you can imagine as a child, it was terrifying. Like, I had no idea what was going on, and I would try to flee only to end up back in my body, only to end up back out again and trying to flee, and this would happen 5, 6, 7 times a night
Mm.
for weeks, for months on end, and I had no idea what was going on whatsoever. So, it was a it was like jumping into the deep end without water wings. I was unprepared for some of the things that I was starting to experience for sure.
Wow. So when you first, do you still experience the shadow being?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
what do you do about them? Because for me, when there's like a shadow being or a creature, I've always pushed the light energy out or just tell it to leave.
Yeah, the one of the first things that's the hardest, I think, for people to learn how to do is to just remain calm and not panic and not be afraid because it's really just contributing fear energy to the situation, which is what they came for physically focused humans. This is a very compacted reality, a very dense reality. And so our emotions here, in order for them to convey, are powerful. It's a very powerful energy. And especially things like fear, anger, or lust. Sometimes those types of personalities show up for that reason as well. But it's really just because those are some of the densest and most powerful energies that we produce here in physical reality. And those energies, because we're used to being physical beings, are a lot more compacted and a lot more powerful than some of what's produced on the other side, where reality is a lot more loosely compacted. It doesn't take as much to communicate energy-wise in less dense reality systems. So those types of personalities turn up for the kind of potent energy that we put out as, human beings, and yeah, if you deny them the energy, usually they just leave. A lot of times when I interact with them, it's just, "I'm sorry, but I don't feed monsters.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to
Yeah.
go." And either they leave or if they stick around, you can sometimes, like you said, like, by radiating if you can get yourself to a place of really understanding unconditional love, that, like, unconditional love is unconditional, so even these shadow beings are a part of love. If you can radiate that energy, sometimes that's a warming or healing energy for them. I feel and again, it's just based on my experience, right? Like, I think anybody who tells you they know for sure what's going on is trying to sell you something. But in my experience, it's almost like they're just trying to gain momentum because they feel they're stuck in an in-between state. They're not high vibrational enough to move back into non-physical realms, but they don't have the momentum to reincarnate or get back into this realm as well. So they're looking for a way out. And it's better rather than giving them that fear energy or that anger energy that is the natural reaction of a lot of physical beings. It's better if you can use that light and that love to give them that energy because it actually helps move them closer to where they need to be.
Ooh, you just touched on something that I actually have talked about in very small circles, that these beings aren't bad or evil. They're just like
Yeah.
every other being and entity. They're on their progression in life. They're on their journey. All
Yes.
things in our reality are growing and expanding in consciousness. It's just that we're, I would say, almost at different points of the spectrum.
Yeah. The whole thing really turned for me when after being afraid, after being angry, after being all of those feelings, it's a progression. I almost got to a place of apathy where I was like, why are we still doing this? Why are you here? What do you want?
Mm,
I actually started talking. And I remember one very specific instance where I said, so what are you? Were you human like me once, or are you something else? And I remember the feeling, the energy of just there was a crash. It was like suddenly I could feel the sadness, the loneliness, the that comment hurt that being.
mm,
And it made me I remember thinking those are all very human emotions. Those are all very whatever however they end up in that state, I'm not sure. I think it may be a combination of things. But underneath that is somebody is lost, sadness, loneliness. It's been soaking in negative energy for a long time because that's usually the response it gets from people. And there when I brought up, "Did you used to be human or what are you?" It was just there was this absolute sadness and confusion. It's like they forgot who they were and they don't know where to go.
mm.
That really changed my perspective on shadow people and, like, paralysis demons. I don't think it's evil. I think some of them, like humans, sometimes turn to evil actions out of a sense of helplessness, and they don't know how to get themselves out of their situation.
Wow, I think the ability to have empathy for something that most people would call a monster is really deeply compassionate. And I would also like to point out that in the book Frankenstein's the Doctor, the monster was actually misunderstood. And just because of the way that it looked, that's when the villagers were attacking this creature. But the creature was actually very kind.
Yeah, and driven to actions through pain.
Mm,
Emotional pain has all of us sometimes doing stuff that we didn't think we would do. And I can only imagine for myself, I had another conversation with one of them. One time I was sitting on my bed talking to a shadow being, and I asked it, I said, "Is this hell?" And he said, "Yes, it's hell, but you can leave." I think that there is again, I think there's a lot of confusion, a lot of it's all led me to believe that these were in one way or another once human constructs
mm,
because they bring a lot of their human thought processes into the situation.
mm,
This construct believed that this was hell, this in between that it can't get out of. I can leave.
mm,
I can go back, but he can't. As much as and again, it's a big ask, right, for people who experience stuff like that because our natural tendency is to react with fear. It's very normal for humans to respond that way, but as much as possible, if you can remain calm and try to have some how do I say this? If you and this is there's no judgment in this whatsoever because it's normal, but if you feel that if you aren't in a place where you can radiate empathy and love and light, then just don't engage, try to cut it off and not feed any more energy in that situation. because I think the more you engage in fearful ways, the fearful activity will escalate.
Mhm.
But if you're a person who can have some empathy in the situation and just shine a little love in a dark places sometimes just need a little bit of light.
Yeah,
It's helpful.
yeah. So we talked a lot about these non-corporeal beings possibly being human, and we've also talked about the good, evil, morality conversation.
Mhm.
So you've had experiences with non-human entities as well. Have you
Yes.
ever had the morality conversation or question to come up with a non-human entity?
I'm not sure that I've ever just had the conversation, but it's difficult to explain when you're in an astral state on the other side, all communication is really vibrational. It's all a psychic communication, and you're really communicating with energy fields. So sometimes things come through in words, sometimes you're saying things, especially if you're working with a personality construct that used to be human in one way or another, whether that's a shadow person or it's I think what people usually call an ascended master or somebody who's was physically got they've got their human street cred in one way or another, basically. Those types of personalities are more easy to converse with in words, like, the ideas mesh, and it's easier to communicate that way. If you come across something that is genuinely is never manifested here, it's not a human construct, its construct comes from another layer of reality, then communication becomes a little different. It can be a little more shaky communicating that way. I think sometimes the reason people, like, we good and evil are a human concept. And it's a concept that makes sense for us here because we experience suffering, because we experience pain, because we experience all of those things. We've decided that which causes suffering in some fashion is what evil is, and that which alleviates it is what good is in some fashion. So, that kind of an idea structure makes sense here in our physical reality. But the idea breaks down a little bit more when you're dealing with non-physical reality structures because they don't experience suffering and pain like physical cold, hunger, all those things that we experience here. It's part of what makes our experience here so potent and so powerful. But in a non-corporeal sense, those concepts don't mesh as well. There's not so much a concealment or hiding of intentions because energy fields communicate immediately upon contact. So there's not really any hiding or lying or malintention happening in those spheres of reality. The only thing that I've ever come across that felt, in a way, what I might term as evil is sometimes you will come across a personality construct that comes from a level of reality that is so different from ours that emotion is not a communication structure for them. And so it's that uncanny valley feeling. It's that feeling of when you're interacting with something that doesn't have any empathy, it's not responding to you in a way that's understandable. Humans underestimate, I think, how much of our communication structure is actually emotional.
Mm,
We use words to put thoughts into a understandable order, but feelings, the expressions, and the energy of emotion is really the foundation and the bedrock of how we communicate in physical reality. But there are layers of reality out there where it's not an emotional based communication structure. And on occasion, I've come across personality constructs that just don't emote. There's no emotion there. And I think that's the closest thing that I can come to a concept of actual evil is something that just it feels so inhuman and so unemotional that there's no connection. I have no way to connect to it. But I'm not sure that's evil. It's just a huge communication barrier in the bedrock of the communication structure.
for sure, that's interesting. On the opposite side of that spectrum, so we're talking about not being able to emote, but on the
Mhm.
opposite side, we have pure love and really just unconditional love. But if you
Yeah.
truly have unconditional love, can that be damaging? So say if you encounter an entity who just loves so much and so wholeheartedly that regardless of what it does, even if it causes something else physical pain, they wouldn't understand physical pain because it's true love. It's for the progression.
Yes. So, this is a conundrum, and you're hitting on the heart of a question that I think spiritual practices and religious practices, a question that hits in all ways is, and it's an old one. If God is all loving and all knowing, then what is happening here? You know what I mean? It's a very deeply rooted question in humanity. And you're right. Broader perspective does not view this physical experience in the same way that we do. The vibe that I get is that this physical experience is desirable and useful and productive and fun and beautiful no matter what it is. And I think that's what actually allows the vibration of unconditional love
Mm,
is a sense of detachment from the suffering that's happening because to their perspective, it's not something that they are able to experience where they are.
mm,
And so being able to come here, being able to have those experiences, it's like in non-physical reality, anything, the vibration you're putting out, it's like it manifests immediately. I can hold out my hand, and an object can appear in my hand. Environments and situations change and move immediately based on whatever vibration you're putting out. It's like law of attraction happens instantly in less dense vibrational realities, right? But here we have a more densely compacted structure where law of attraction still applies, but it's moving through a much more dense energy. And so it doesn't immediately manifest. And that space in between, say this well, it's like creating a tension between action points.
mm.
So the wanting of something and the having it happen are pulled. There's a tension in the energy, and that creates a momentum or a satisfaction. It gives space to imagine, create, think of different ways, want like when you want something, when it happens, it feels more powerful. All of the energies and emotions and creation that we put forward here in physical reality are much more powerful because they have to be in order to get through the denser nature of our reality. And so, from their perspective, it's more like when you sit down to play Call of Duty in a sandbox reality, like, with all your friends online, you're doing that because it's fun to experience that. It's fun to be a soldier, to experience different things, to play with others in an interactive environment. And you know that you're putting on the VR headset and that it's going to be totally immersive, and that's the value of it. Can you imagine if we had a VR technology that was so immersive that when you put the thing on, you didn't remember that you weren't that person you're experiencing, and how excited we would be as humanity to have a technology like that? From our perspective, we would know that we were putting on the VR headset, and we would know that ultimately it's coming off and no harm will come to us. And we would be excited to have that fully immersive experience of being someone else, experiencing that personality construct. And that's more the perspective of broader perspective is they understand it's a VR headset. And even if you're going to put on the VR headset or the personality of somebody who's going to go through some things, the experience of doing that is powerful and valid and a blessing, even if it's not we know it's not going to feel like that being here. The immersion is a part of the value of the experience. Does that
I was, like,
th
clapping to myself. I was that was well said.
but I'm still very new to expressing these ideas out
Yeah.
loud, so I'm working on it, but it's very much more a view like that. It's what people term as angels and guides. They're like the people sitting on the couch watching you play in the living room. You might not be able to hear them, but they're like, "Yes, and no, go this way." And it's a very supported reality. But the immersion or the not knowing of that is part of the experience. So they just have a different point of view about it than we do.
I think you did a really good job explaining simulation theory. I don't know if that's what you meant to do. That's basically what you just explained is the idea that we don't know if and we can't prove or disprove this, right? So we
Mhm.
don't know if we're in the base simulation or not. And theoretically, we could actually be The Sims in the Sims game, and there could be a being playing us. And from that perspective, no, they would have no real attachment because to them it's a video game. But if you're playing Call of Duty, you're still the soldier fighting in the war.
I would say that in a little bit of a different way. It's not unconditional love. Okay, the concept of unconditional love to some degree is a sense of detachment. Because in physical reality, we humans, we tend to attach, how do I say this well? We love in a way that reflects on us. So we tend to, if somebody we love somebody, we want them to treat us a certain way. We base our own validity on does he bring me flowers? Are we going out? Am I treated well? Or even when it's something as unconditional as loving your children, it's still there's an attachment there because society is going to reflect that back on you. What they do, the teachers are going to call you and complain about it, and it's up to you to fix it. And there's a lot of self-attachment attached to love in this reality, even like the love of a parent and a child, which is, I think, as close to truly unconditional as you get here. But for our non-corporeal counterparts, love is just an exuberant, excited feeling for our experience, but it doesn't reflect back on them in they're not if you do something here that in physical reality we would consider horrible, they're not sitting up on a cloud being disappointed in in your performance and feeling like they failed as guides. There's a separation there. So, it's not so much that they don't care what you're going through. They know that you came here to go through things.
Mm,
So, the constructs is like how do I say this? Self is like an amoeba. You have a higher self, but that higher self is actually taking portions of its energy and lovingly crafting you, creating you. Each human that's here is very like picking out your characters on and what their stats are gonna be on a game or creating a D&D character is like there's thought process and care that goes into crafting the personality that you are, and that personality is not just some throwaway video game character, it's an extension of self, it's an extension of that higher self. You are a nerve ending for the rest of the universe. So, it's not an unfeeling construct just to have something to play with.
mm.
It's a carefully crafted and adored personality construct for the purpose of growing the experience of higher self.
So from that higher self perspective, what would you say is their purpose in doing that, or what is their spiritual growth that they're getting out of it?
Source energy or consciousness is the purpose is to continue the expansion of experience. Of all realities, in all directions, in all systems, in all timelines, all probabilities. The whole thing keeps expanding. And every point of consciousness, like you, me, everything, even atoms have their own point of consciousness, their experience point. It's like every personality is like a think of it like a lightning strike, but every point at which something strikes generates a new strike and a new strike. It just continues expanding and growing. And the point of it is for the consciousness to be able to experience itself. Or to say it another way, I don't usually use this word, but it's all of creation is God's way of self-exploration, of knowing self, of going deeper, of finding more ways to express through creating different points of view, different moment points, different experience points that will, from that point, create more continuously.
Interesting. And I 100% vibe with that, and I agree. Because as the universe continuously expands, which is scientifically proven, it is continuously
Mhm.
expanding. I like to think of everything within the universe to be all of consciousness. Imagine your brain, and as you create new neural pathways, each new neural pathway would be a different expression of source consciousness, right?
Mhm.
So my question is that if we take that brain analogy, is there just one brain, or would there be can there be two brains? Can there be two source consciousnesses?
That's an interesting question. Does God have other gods? Is there other consciousnesses expanding? And I don't know.
Mm,
That's beyond my my it's an interesting contemplation, and I'm sure that it's possible. Maybe what we think of as total consciousness has other consciousnesses that are in its family tree.
mm,
I don't how do I say this? One of the analogies that I kind of use for myself to help explain it, because humans are so visual, we need something visual to understand what we're thinking about sometimes, is it's like an apartment complex. And if you step back from the window of your apartment, like, you're looking out the window at physical reality, but if you step back, you're in the apartment of your current life experience, right? Everything that encompasses it, the walls, the floors, the ceilings. But you also have connected to that everything on the same floor of that apartment, like, the horizontal plane is all the probable selves, the infinite probabilities, all the things you could have been, would have been, are playing out on that horizontal field of the apartment complex. And then the vertical floors of the apartment complexes are all alternative selves, other lifetimes, other incarnations. From that perspective of the apartment complex, it's all happening simultaneously.
mm,
There is an expansion of it in that it keeps growing. It's an infinite apartment complex. Itself is really the definition of infinity in that it just keeps going. But from that inner perspective, you don't necessarily have to experience it in a linear fashion. The apartment is all attached to itself. So it's all happening at the same time. And the perspective of higher self would be the perspective of the apartment building.
mhm,
Like, higher self has the experience of all of the floors and all of the probabilities and all of that. But I don't think that means that it's singular. The self could be a part of an apartment complex of other buildings.
mhm,
And that complex could be a part of a whole neighborhood of apartment complexes, right? It's exponential. It's difficult for us to put a definition on infinity that's
mm,
something other than mathematical.
yeah.
So,
Interesting. So from that analogy, then the architect himself or their self would be the source.
yeah, I feel how do I say this? The consciousness that encompasses all of experience,
Mhm,
all of the complexes, all of the apartment buildings, all of the whole world full of neighborhood. If it's possible to contemplate a consciousness that can experience all of that like so many nerve endings. And I think it's hard for us to think about that, but at the same time, do we not all experience all of our nerve endings and create an experience out of that without having to know all of it individually? Like, it creates all of our nerve endings create a complete experience for us, without us really thinking about it. It's just a part of our experience. So it's hard to think about a consciousness that can experience all of creation like so many nerve endings, but we know that we do that ourselves. So
yeah. Because that would be analogous be to say that the trillions of cells in our bodies, we be aware of every single one of those trillion cells, which is difficult to conceive of.
yeah. And yet the whole system functions together in a way that creates a collective experience. Every atom in your body works together with other atoms to make those cells. And then those cells know their function. They work together with the other cells in that organ or whatever it is. And those organs all work together. It's like a up communication. And all of the individual parts of it consciously know they're not saying, I'm an atom, a part of a cell that's part of your liver. But they know their role in it, and it all creates a communication structure that functions together in exactly the way it's supposed to work with us and communicate with us. So we may not know the individual cells, but we know when our stomach hurts. We know when we feel tired or unwell, and depending on your degree of connectedness, like, you can drill down on that to get to the energy of what exactly the problem is with your body. It's a complex consciousness structure that's, very communicative.
Mm. So as a person whom when you said that, I got chills. As a person who feels and is able to move energy around their body, at what level of, conscious expression would that be relative to the trillions of cells in your body?
My unders here my understanding of it is that all physical matter is a vibration, vibrating at different frequencies, different patterns of vibration, almost like coding, right? Like the same way that we code a website, but it's all a pattern of ones and zeros, but it creates this incredible experience that we experience. And finding of stabilizing a physical reality structure is rare, a little precarious because of how dense it is. It has a tendency to be a little unstable, and creating a attraction-based physical reality structure, the consciousness that comes out of that tends to lean towards the fear or defensive or angry side eventually. So the system becomes a little bit precarious. But in order for, okay, complex consciousness like what we are, because in my view, the human construct, the soul or the personality pattern that is operating in this physical reality, it's a technique of experience. And our bodies, our physical, we've always been experiencing it. We were experiencing it through leaves and through bark and through the earth itself. We were experiencing it when it was stardust. We were experiencing it when it was dinosaurs. It's consciousness has always experienced everything that came out of this physical reality. And with the development of like modern humans, we're just all it is that evolution has, through those adverse conditions, has gotten to a point where it's produced a hardware that is capable of running more of the complex program, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. The hardware through evolutionary processes gets to a point where it's now capable of using more of the consciousness structure that is the non-physical or broader perspective consciousness.
Mm.
But it took some time for it to get to that point.
Interesting. So talking about the stability of reality, I
Mhm,
one thing that people would be surprised to know that, first of all, nothing's really stable, right? Because stable is relative. Everything
mhm,
degrades, everything breaks down, everything, quote, unquote, "dies." So talking about the stability of reality in our consciousness, would
mhm.
you say that through evolution and as we expand our consciousness, would that be why we start to live longer? We start to be able to experience things outside of ourselves, such as sixth senses or catching a vibe from somebody.
Yeah, we've now got ourselves to an organic consciousness structure that was developed within the physical reality system, within these laws of physics, this membrane that makes up our physical reality. Now we have a complex consciousness structure through evolution that has the processing power, like having a computer with better processing. It's got the processing power for us to be able to experience more of everything that we actually are in this physical reality. So you're starting to get more bleed through of everything that we're actually capable of, like empathy, people who can sense and feel energy, feel emotions coming off of people, can receive the visions, hear audible coming through, who can more of what consciousness or the soul, if you prefer, is actually capable of from a broader perspective or in non-physical reality. We now have more of the capability to run those programs, basically, to be able to sense and use those abilities here.
Ooh, said. So when you look at things as we being machines, machines that are growing and evolving organic machines, albeit.
Mhm.
So, that's where the term download would most likely come from or where that derived, you know?
Yeah, I think people started using the word download to describe what was happening, and again, I only have my own experience, but when getting a download to me or getting the knowing, like I said, I always called it, it's like you get an entire block of information. It's a total concept
Mm,
that hits all at once. And it's almost like you have to spend some time figuring out how to put like a linear word order on what it is you just know now, because the knowing will come in a full chunk, like a total concept, and it takes a little bit of time to explain it to yourself in human terms with words and thoughts.
mm. I love that. There is one more thing I wanna talk about before we end this, and we
Yeah, go ahead.
talked about the laws of physics and the laws of the universe, and
Mhm,
earlier on, we were talking about the law of attraction, but there
mhm.
are other laws and other principles to the universe. What makes the law of attraction so hyper-focused nowadays?
Do you mean why are so many people focused on it now,
Yeah, as
or
opposed to the other laws of the universe.
I think it relates to what we were just talking about in that we're starting and even science is starting to get into, like, string theory and other dimensions and really contemplating we are starting to contemplate beyond our physics.
Mhm,
We're starting to look at understanding that the laws of our universe aren't necessarily making them universal laws,
mhm,
right? These are the laws that dictate and make sense out of the reality membrane that we're experiencing, this physical reality. It helps stabilize the sandbox environment.
mhm,
It's if you're all going to meet up in Call of Duty, regardless if you are here and someone's in England and someone else is in Georgia or wherever they are, there has to be a universal environment for people to interact in so that those interactions can all have continuity. And I think as both science progresses and as spirituality progresses, more and more people are using more of those sixth senses. What we're getting to is a consensus of the laws that of physics that dictate our universe. They may only apply to our universe. They may only apply to our system. And we're starting to realize that there's probably more than
mhm,
just that based on the math, based on our observations. They don't know what dark energy is. They don't know what dark matter is. They don't know what's happening at the event horizon of a black hole. There's the more we discover, the more we realize we don't know. And I think that law of attraction is starting to come through more people's downloads, more people's experiences. And it's our attempt, at least, we're at the very early stages of this, but at finding not just the laws of our universe, but universal laws that actually apply in all dimensions and across all of existence.
I love that. It's funny because, like you said, there's so much that we don't know as we start to push the bounds of quantum physics.
Mhm.
And, there are literally particles, they're called ghost particles, and they're a type of neutrino that pass through our planet. They pass through the entire universe, but they pass through our planet. But they bleep out of existence and then go somewhere else. And then
Mhm.
they come back with more energy, and then they charge the particles around them.
Yes.
And this is all happening due to quantum entanglement. But when they leave and come back, we don't know where they go, and we don't know where this energy came from.
Yeah. There's a lot to explore there in that concept as well, and again, if you're wanting me to wrap this up,
But
you're gonna have to stop saying interesting.
yeah, we definitely do need to come to an end here, but Kat, it has been so amazing talking to you. Is there anything that you wanna leave with the audience before we go?
Oh, and my gosh, keep exploring, keep an open mind, don't limiting beliefs, peel away like an onion, limiting beliefs to get to the core of what's going on because the possibilities are endless, and it like I said, I don't think anybody has really, hit on the reality of what's going on. There's still so much to explore, and I think that the most exciting final frontier is really self and the inner work that we're doing in spiritual communities. And I think it relates back to science, and we'll find a way to pull those together to create an understanding, I think.
I love that so much. There's one more thing that I want to say, and I took it off of your page,
Mhm.
and it says, "Being weird ain't easy, but it sure is interesting."
Yes, for sure.
So thank you so much, Kat, for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Playing Soup. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.